Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Curiosity Key podcast, where I'm joined with Paul Dunn from B1G1. Welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast.
Charlie, well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for the invitation. And what a beautifully named podcast, right? Curiosity, right? So I am so looking forward to where our conversation goes. And for everybody joining us, thank you, and thank you again, Charlie, for inviting me. I'm really privileged to be here.
Oh, brilliant. So my curiosity led me to meet you, which was only last year. And I have to say that you are such an energetic force to be reckoned with. And I'm so thrilled to be part of the B1G1 community, which we will explain a little bit more about shortly. But also, I think since meeting you in, was it November or December?
Yeah.
I think I've met you about 3 times since. And considering that I'm based in the UK and you're over in Singapore, it's quite remarkable, really.
Well, I mean, the world is very different, right, than it used to be. I mean, I was, because you were here, I think, about a couple of years ago in Singapore, and it's an amazing place to be, and a wonderful place to run, a global enterprise. But then again, anywhere is a wonderful place to run a global enterprise. There's never been a time like this. I mean, as you know, we can businesses. There's no such thing, I think, now as a small business, quote unquote, small business. Everybody is a global business and has that capacity to do that. And what you and I know is that there are people, maybe some of whom are joining us right now, who are actually running a business, and I mean this positively, right, running a business in their bedroom. You could not have done that years ago. And they're outperforming, the sort of standard businesses, because they're now able to turn things around faster. They can essentially be 24 hours by using, people in the gig economy in various parts of the world, and so on and so forth. So this is an amazing time to be in business. Once we grasp it and really run with all the opportunities are there, and get curious about how can we continue to use those opportunities to do things that amaze us as entrepreneurs, and at the same time, amaze the customers with whom we're dealing as well.
And that's what I love about being curious, is that I think when you let your natural curiosity go wild, amazing things can happen. And the world really is your oyster. You can just achieve whatever it is that you want.
Yeah, I was saying to someone the other day. It's very interesting you said that. I was mentoring a whole group of people, startups actually, and startups are kind of interesting. And I remember I had a picture on the slide of an eyeball, right? And it was a sort of scary picture in a way, come to think of it. But anyway, it was this eyeball. And what I said was, when we think about improvement and all of that kind of stuff, particularly self-improvement, we tend to think that and we get told, what we need to do is to look inward, because all change, here's the guru voice, right? All change comes from within, right? So we need to sort of go deep and all those sorts of things. And I mean, I really get that. I absolutely get it. But then, so I had this arrow kind of thing showing inward, going into the eye. And I said, but really, when you think about it, it really should be the other way. We should be looking outward, not because we want things to change around us necessarily. I mean, certainly we've got to change, but it's only when we look outward that we see the opportunities that are there to make enormous contributions to the way in which the world works. And by the way, when you hear me say enormous contributions, that doesn't mean that we have to be, large businesses and all of that kind of stuff. It's really not about that. As you know, one of the things that I talk about very frequently is the power of small, the ability to really see that tiny things can make absolutely massive differences to the way that businesses work, and hence the experience that the customer has. And I've talked with a guy yesterday, actually, a guy I mentor, and he's in Oxford, right? So, as in Oxford, United Kingdom, right? So, this is not a Singapore. And his name, I'll tell you his first name. His first name is Joe. And Joe is a garden designer. Okay, so in some ways, Joe is kind of fixed in a sense because it's easier for him, or at least it used to be, easier for him to deal with people who wanted to create beautiful gardens in Oxford. And through some of the mentoring things that we started to do with them, he said yesterday, he said, you know what? He said, the process that I used to go with my customers, they would come, there were prospects at least would come in, and he said, if I counted the amount of time that it took for me to go visit with the customer, for me to measure this and measure that, and design, and then how do you feel about the design, which are the ones you're going to choose, and all that kind of stuff. He said it was actually, it may have taken 2 or 3 months for that, but it was actually, in terms of time, it was like about 2 weeks of his personal time to do that. And yesterday I was sharing on a particular thing. It's now, he said, isn't it? He said it's now a matter of hours, not
Wow.
even days. And that's because he was always asking, being curious, how can I make that little change, that tiny little change? And it's only when you do that, well, it's not only when you do that, but when you do that, you get to see that it's very small things that make a difference. Let me give you a very simple example of Joe, right? So most of Joe's business is from what many people joining us now might actually do. That is, they might have things that they call quotations or proposals, where the customer says, or potential customer says, okay, well, can you get back to me with a proposal or something, or a quote or whatever.
Yep.
And when you think about, a typical quote says, okay, it's my pleasure to quote the supply and delivery of, 7 of these, 9 of these, 3 of these. And then we sort of add it all up and we underline it and everything else. That's what a typical thing looks like. And so, guess what the customer focuses on? Well, the customer focuses on, there's this thing which is called the peak end effect. Without getting too technical about it, it's called the peak end effect, which basically means that we tend to remember the last thing we hear. That tends to be, that's a very simple one. It's a bit more complex than that, but that's what it means. So if you think of that normal quote unquote quotation, guess what? The last thing they see is the price. Okay, that's the last thing that they see. And anybody joining us right now, just write down a couple of numbers. In fact, let's just play with some numbers that I use all the time. Just write down, let's put a pound sign and let's go 1,038.00, right? Let's just imagine in your head now that that's what the price was at the bottom. Let's do the same thing and let's just remove the pound sign. Let's just remove it. All of a sudden, that number looks smaller. Now, let's remove the comma, right, from the 1,038. All of a sudden, the number looks smaller. And let's remove the decimal 00, and all of a sudden, the number looks smaller. Now, the number is still the same. There's no question about the number is the same. The reality is the customer will see it smaller. And that's weird, right? But it's still the last thing they hear, that they see. So in working with Joe, and I'll tell you something about the numbers in a minute. In working with Joe, he said, Joe, why don't you reverse that? And instead of calling it a quotation, why don't you call it a plan? Right? So in other words, here's the quotation. You would say, no, here's the plan moving forward. And then let's say he was doing a proposal for you, Charlie. He would say, hi, Charlie, it was great to speak with you on the phone today. And based on what you've told me, it seems like this is what your investment, or this is what the price is going to be. It's going to be 1,038 or whatever the number is. And then he would say, and that includes a number of very special things. And guess what? All of a sudden, the person reading that is now focused on those very special things, not the price. Joe told me yesterday, he said, Paul, it's almost embarrassing. I'm embarrassed to tell you, I don't know why you'd be embarrassed, but he said he was, that I'm now, this is crazy, I'm now at almost 100% conversion on those quotes. And he said, so I know what you're going to say to me. I know you're going to say, well, therefore your price is too cheap. And he said, Paul, since we've been working together, the price is twice what it was before. Twice. And, that's a simple example of the power of small.
I
Very,
know.
very small.
Well, I talk a
And
lot
by the
about people
way,
because two of my sporting heroes, it's Dave Brailsford that manages Team Sky. His ethos, which is all around looking at the smallest things that you can make changes.
yeah,
Sort of make 100 small changes rather than change one big thing, because then you'll have
exactly
much
right.
greater
Exactly right.
impact. And I think I was talking, it was Natalie Jameson, who was a previous guest on this
Yes.
podcast, who
Yeah,
had
we know
listened to me
Natalie
drone
because
on
she's
about
part of
sports
B1G1.
and micro commitments and things like that for ages. And also talk about my desire to embed kind of business giving into my business, because I wanted to create an impact. And I didn't like the charity model, because I do that already through the LinkedIn local events that I organize, but I wanted something slightly different. And I hadn't yet found that solution. And she said, oh, there's this event, you need to come and meet Paul Dunn and Masami and talk about, just come and talk to them. And that's how I was introduced to yourselves and to B1G1.
Well.
And I think it was as soon as you started talking about the power of small that, you only need to say one thing, or not you necessarily, but, if you go somewhere, the speaker or the event host or somebody just needs to say one thing that generally just hooks you in. And then you're like, just keep telling me, just keep talking, tell me what I need to do. And so that's I wanted to get you on this podcast as well to talk about B1G1, the power of small, and also about incorporating business giving in a way that not only helps you make an impact in this world, but then also helps you grow your own business as well. But I think because just backtrack a little bit and just introduce yourself, because as we've just talked about, you have a lot of business mentoring experience, you have a lot of business experience, and now you're involved with B1G1 in a really big way. So can you just introduce yourself from that, kind of how you bring it all together, and also what brought you into the B1G1 community as well?
Sure I can. Sure I can. And let me make some people feel. Someone described my voice the other day, and they said, "Oh, Paul, you've got an Australian accent." Which, oh God, no, really no, because I was hoping that I hadn't lost my English accent, because I was born in Dover, in the United Kingdom, right? And then I was, Charlie, anybody who you talk with these days is, and who has the privilege of doing what I do, which is, talk from stages and all of that sort of stuff. And then you're supposed to have a classic story, right? Which is, typically people talk about the hero's journey, where the hero is, like going through stress, and then all of a sudden, boom, and wonders happen. And so if your listeners are expecting, me to go through that, I would love to go through that, except that's not how I see my life. I see it as just extraordinary luck. Seriously, extraordinary luck. And sure, you can say, well, you make your luck, but again, I don't see it that way. It's so how lucky can you be to, way back before you were even thought of in your parents' eyes, let alone born. How lucky could you be to be plucked out of a mining village? That was where I was, down in the southeast Kent coalfield, and plucked out of that. And someone says, "We want you to come to Australia, and we want you to be one of the first 10 in Hewlett Packard in Australia." I mean, it's like, oh, how cool is that, right? And you're actually sitting down and, having breakfast and lunch occasionally with Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard. And I was speaking in Silicon Valley recently, in the US, and on the plane on the way there was a movie playing which was all about Silicon Valley, and it reminded me that Silicon Valley was founded by Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, right, all those years ago. So again, how lucky could I be to be a part of that? And then to go on and form one of Australia's first computer companies, and then to go to a seminar, to get dragged to a seminar, actually really dragged. I didn't want to go to a seminar. Why would I want to go to a seminar? At that point, we had this computer company, this way back when, and it was doing 23 million or something, and someone said, "Why don't you come to this seminar?" And I said, "Why would I want to go? I got 150 people on the thing. Why would I want to go?" Anyway, long story short, they got me there, and here was somebody who I'm sure many of your listeners would know of, if not know, or he's no longer with us, but this is James Rohn or Jim Rohn. And there was Jim Rohn, and I go, oh my gosh, this and I kind of saw myself as him. It was really, really weird. And that was when I realized that inside me there was this passion to speak, to be able to say to people, hey, there's really amazing things that we can do. And so I didn't really know how to do that, but I thought, well, let's give that a bit of a whirl. And that created a thing called the Results Corporation, and we ended up with an amazing business where we were responsible for all of the marketing for some 23,000 businesses. And then out of that, I then created a program for, it wasn't really, well, it was the program, yes, for accountants. I realized that I'm not an accountant, by the way, but I realized that all of these 23,000 businesses had one thing in common, which was accountants. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if this is looking outward thing again, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if instead of accountants saying, oh, we help you report, or we report on history, wouldn't it be interesting to help them flip that 180 degrees and say, what we do is we help our selected clients create history. And of course, we had the technology then, meaning intellectual technology as well, to help them do that. And so that created this amazing thing called the Accountants Boot Camp. And the folks in the United Kingdom gave me some really nice awards for all the things that we did right then. And then in 2006, I was actually mentoring Masami, who you mentioned a minute ago, and she was running. She was a Japanese chef, actually. At that point, she was running a tiny little food business, and then in the mentoring thing, she, typically when you're being mentored, it is the mentor that asks the questions of the mentee, right? But anyway, so we're in this session, and Masami sort of changes it up, and she says, I've got a question for you. I said, okay, what's the question? And she said, well, I've just had these things start occurring to me. And she said, I want you to imagine something. And I said, what do you want me to imagine? She said, well, what if, this was the question, what if every time business was done, something great happened in our world? And I said, well, it's an interesting proposition. And she said, well, it's a little more than that. She said, I've got a name for it. And I said, oh, really? What's the name? She said, well, it's called Buy One, Give One, she said. And I said, okay. So how does that work? And because it didn't sound that kind of cool to me at that point. And then she said, well, imagine if you would, and those of you listening to us now, just imagine you're me at this point, right? So she says, well, Paul, imagine going to buy a plasma TV. This is in 2006, right? And imagine that. And I said, well, wait a minute, this thing's called Buy One, Give One? She said, yes. I said, well, if I go and buy a plasma TV, the people I'm buying it from aren't going to give me another one. So she said, no, you misunderstand. She said, imagine this. You want to get this TV because you want better vision, right? So how would it be if when you bought that TV, somebody who could not see got the gift of sight just because you did that? And I remember going, oh my goodness. And then she sort of heard that sort of suck of air, if you will, and said, oh, imagine all of the cups of coffee that are sold today. And imagine if for every one of those, every time that happened, a kid in need got access to pure life-saving water just because of that. Or imagine if someone buys your book, that a tree gets planted. And I remember saying, can I be your mentor for the rest of your life? That's just and that was when that started. I mean, that's the short version of the story. And then so we started that in 2007. It sounds like a really simple idea, but I think everybody joining us would understand that it's not so easy to actually do. And it took us 3 years to figure out, just like we said, for the typical kind of charity model, like we get it, but it doesn't really kind of make sense. For all sorts of reasons, or there has to be not that it doesn't make sense, but there has to be a different way of doing that, which is this way of B1. We call it now B1G1, as you said, and so now it took 3 years to figure it out. How do you get a model where I can, as you know, we can say to you, no, Charlie, every time you give fully 100% of what you give goes to where you choose it to go, right? And there's 500 projects that are high impact projects around the world. And since you and I are talking right now on Zoom, and so we can see each other, and so you can see behind me that little number there, which later today is going to get changed because it's now 181 million giving impacts that have been created through this model, this movement, if you will, which we're so privileged to have people like you, people like Natalie, joining us. And so what's interesting about that, going back to the power of small, is if you think about business, we tend to think that you've got to be large. You've got to. People say, "Well, someday when I'm successful, right? Whatever that means, then I think I'll think about my fortune and I'll think about my legacy, and I'll probably do something about that." But what if you didn't have to wait? What if you could actually do the things that I just mentioned? What if you could do that for 1 cent? What if you could do that, right? What if you could give a kid access to water? Well, wouldn't you want to do that? Wouldn't you want to sort of link your giving in a particular way? Now, you might say, well, why would you do that? Why would you want to do that? Answer the question. The people that we are so privileged to serve in B1G1, you're in that, as you know, say to us that what actually happens is it's not sort of like giving in the strict sense of the word. We said, well, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, because of the way in which B1G1 works, what actually happens in our company when we use this is it shifts the spirit of the company. Another way that they say that is it transforms it. And I mean, that's not what we set out to do initially. It was just, how can we find a very smart way to make it so easy for small to medium scale businesses, which, as you know, make up 90% of most of the economies in the so-called developed world. How can we do that? And so, yeah, there's the story, which probably took way too long to tell you, but hopefully there, along the lines, there was some little tidbits which were kind of interesting for the people.
No, I love it, because I think it's, I've heard it a few times now, having been to various B1G1 events, and I will give the B1G1X event a little bit of a plug at the end of this episode. Because I think the last time that we saw each other was it was back in February in London, and it was a 2-day, it was like B1G1X event that it was called. And what was so fantastic about that was that it was a bit like TEDx events. So for anybody listening, if you've never been to a TEDx event, it brings together speakers talking about something that they're passionate or curious about. And it's all very inspiring, very engaging, and very motivating as well. So the B1G1X event brought together lots of members of the B1G1 community from different sized businesses. So you got to hear about how individuals, so like myself, I'm a very, like kind of micro business, it's just me. So how I'm using giving impacts in my business, and then also how bigger companies are not only engaging better with their clients, but also engaging better with their team to create a more positive impact in the world. And it was just such a wonderful experience to be sat in a room for 2 days with like-minded people, all really, really committed to making a difference in this world. And it was just amazing.
Well,
and then, the next event they're doing, it's Steve Pipe, who an incredible person, and he's organising another event in October as well. So I will include the link in the show notes to that as well. So I strongly recommend, if you're interested in anything that we're saying today, you're based in the UK or in Europe and want to come and find out more, then join us at the event in October.
That it's going to be a great event. And part of the reason, by the way, for that is that, a friend of ours called Daniel Priestley, who is, runs the Key Person of Influence program in the United Kingdom, and someone that I mentor as well. Dan puts it very well, and Dan says he has this interesting three-letter phrase which says this. Well, actually, let's make it four-letter phrase. Right? So it's your environment. Actually, let's make it five. Your environment dictates your performance. Right? You can say that in three. Your environment dictates performance, right? Or you can put the word "you're" in there. And what that means is that just consider, for example, that we, meaning you and I, and the people listening to us, joined. We had the privilege of working in Google for a week. Let's just imagine. Now, when we're in that environment, are we more than likely to be a little more creative than we are in the environment that we might normally be in? The answer is of course. And so you can kind of get it, right? And so part of that environment, rather obviously, is the people that you hang out with, right? That's part of the environment. So why wouldn't you want to hang out with people who, if you're a small, tiny business or a startup, why wouldn't you want to be sitting next to someone who was that and said, this is what I did? And look, I incorporated giving straight away, and it's just been amazing because, it helped me connect to myself. It helps me connect, over there. Why wouldn't you want to do that? And so, that's, I think, one of the really interesting benefits. And to come back to the point of your podcast, or at least the brilliant name of it, curiosity, right? Why wouldn't you want to be sitting next to someone and be able to say, how did you do that, right? How did, and just be able to be in an environment where even on, Facebook groups and the like, you're able to sort of pose those kind of questions. And as a result, do things that you never even thought it were possible to do. And yet you can do them. I mean, who would have thought that, 3 or 4 years ago, well, let's go back 5 years, because it was actually 5 years ago, who would have thought that you and I could be seeing each other on a call right now, right? Video, full HD video, and, here we are recording everything and so on. And who would have thought, and that's free, right? Who would have thought we could have been doing that? I mean, it's just like, what? It's amazing, right? And so all of these things, these new things that are coming are there. By the way, I also think they come with a little bit of a warning, in as much as I think that when I'm in Silicon Valley, it's interesting when you're there. The reality is that there is a sad reality, and the sad reality is that when you think about kids, for example, but I'll show you how it's actually thinking about us as well. We find when I'm holding up my phone to you right now, we find that many kids are more connected to the phone than they are to the family. But then again, when you look at the family, you find the family is more connected to their phones than to the kids, right? So I think this also gives us an opportunity as well to kind of think about things in different ways and say, how can we get lots of things done in a different way so that we are free then to be doing the human things, right, that are there, and to connect. And one of the interesting things about that, as you know, in B1G1, or, well, let's not talk about it in B1G1 terms for a minute. Let's just say that I find it very, very interesting that, 3.5 years ago, well, actually, 3.5 years ago, in 2015, some interesting business people who your users, or your listeners, I should say, would be familiar with, Sir Richard, as in Sir Richard Branson, Paul Polman, he formerly of Unilever, big business, but so in tune with what's happening at a small level. Now the president of the International Chamber of Commerce, and other people like Bill Gates and so on were there in this room in Geneva, launching these incredible things that you can see on the wall behind me. You can, called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And these are 30 targets. As you and I speak, right, there's all sorts of things happening with, climate change and people having strikes and whatever it is they're doing, saying, hang on, it's about time we noticed all of these things. What's really interesting is on the 23rd of September in 2015, all of these business leaders got together and said one important thing. They said this. They said, you know what? It's not governments that change our world. I just want everybody to hear that. It's not governments that change our world. They said the reason we are together today in Geneva is because it is businesses that change our world.
Mm-hmm.
And so when businesses have a common language, when businesses really understand that that simple point about businesses are the ones that change, well, certainly governments can enable it and everything else. When we get that, then we get this deeper responsibility that we have to actually make a difference. And how cool is it that we've now got a common language called the Sustainable Development Goals, these 17 goals that we need to hit by 2030. And I used to say, in fact, probably when I last saw you in February, I would have said something along the lines of these give us a common language or a pathway. I think I probably would have said a pathway for business. I now see it a little bit differently. What I think they are is a pathway for humanity.
Mm.
And so just think about that for a minute. That what remember when we started and we said that whole thing, and by the way, we're for those of you joining us, I hope you get that we're kind of making this up as we go. I guess so, but hopefully with some truth in this. And I mean, I didn't start out thinking about eyeballs that when we talked about I didn't think that was where I was going to go, but we went there. So let's just go back there, right?
We are
And remember what we
pursuing our
said
curiosity, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So you go back there and say, okay, it's not looking inward. Remember, it's looking outward. And so once you think about that, and you start thinking about your business in, instead of being self-focused, you get others focused.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, it's an incredible change that occurs in your business for not just for you, but for your team as well. And we also know that team members now are wanting to work for businesses that have that inner sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be going home at the end of the day going, oh my goodness, is that all there is? No, there's much more. And you and me and all of the other people that really get this are able now to do things in a way that we were never able to do before. That's why I said this is one of the most exciting, well, it is, I think, the most exciting time ever.
I mean, having worked in teams in the past, and because I work for myself now, I do slightly miss the team dynamic every now and again.
Yeah.
And I just think, I wish I'd have come across B1G1 in the past, because, if I'd ever tried to kind of run a charity event, or, even, one of the Macmillan Cancer bake-off mornings, you've always got certain people in the team that are not as engaged because that particular charity doesn't ring true for them personally. And, you've got companies that kind of nominate a specific charity to support because that means something to the founders, or that means something to the business, but that doesn't necessarily mean something to their client base or their team or their whole team. And what I loved about B1G1 is that, how many, was it 500 projects that you said that you've got?
Yes, 500 plus, yes.
500,
it's
all around the world, all covering all of the different sustainable development goals. So my passion and my main interest is all around empowering others using training and education, and also giving people access to what I would consider to be basic human rights, things like clean water, things that we take for granted. So I tend to focus my giving on training and education, and on access to clean water, and projects that I care specifically about. But what I've also started doing is trying to put it out there to my clients and say, what are you passionate about? What kind of impact do you want to make? And if I had a team, and hopefully when I have a team as I grow my business, is that I can then put that out to the team and say, what do you want to contribute to, and what do you want to support? And I love that about B1G1. And
you can. You can change that in a heartbeat, right? Because it's not, XYZ company, your company proudly supports, ABC charity. It's not that. You can literally change it in a heartbeat. And what's really interesting, as you suggest, is you could actually not just have your team members choosing different things, but you could actually have your customers choosing interesting things, or you could choose interesting things on behalf of your customers, right? So this is opening up all sorts of, and you can do that on your iPhone or indeed on your Android, right? So it's a really a cool thing. By the way, talking of iPhones and Androids and all that sort of stuff, what I find really interesting is that kids get this. Kids really get it. You start talking to them about all of this, they go, "Oh my gosh, it's so so obvious to the kids." Whereas we who aren't as young as we used to be, it's like, "Oh, I can't do that. Oh, someday." Where the kids go, "No, let's do this now." And I would recommend that everybody gets that kind of kiddish curiosity and let's go do it and let's just see what happens.
Oh, but that's the thing, isn't it? As children, we are such naturally curious beings. I was one of the worst. Always asking why, always going to people, going, "Well, why are you doing that? I don't understand." That annoying kid at school, always asking questions. But why do we need to know this? What does that mean? And always, asking questions. And I think when you're at school and when you start to get older, people kind of try to calm your curiosity down, try to get you to stop asking as many questions and kind of discover things yourself, or just kind of tone it down a bit. And I find that the more adults I speak to are less curious than they want to be or could be because of this kind of cultural conditioning, if you like. But then when you look at children, they have no limits on this, and they're always out there going, with this incredible imagination, this incredible curiosity to know how you could do things differently. And I think that's what I wanted to achieve with this podcast, is to try and inspire more people to be a bit more curious, because I know it's benefited me hugely, because I've never really stopped asking questions.
But what's also interesting, and you're so right, but what's also interesting is sometimes we as adults, we kind of dumb down the question. And let me explain what I mean by that. Someone once said, I can't remember who it was, but someone once said, the answers are always there. It just depends on the question you ask as to which answer you get. So let's imagine that someone listening to us now is thinking about, the next quarter or something, or the next year. And they're asking this question, and they're going, how could I increase my business by, let's pick a number, 10%? How could I do that, right? And think about that question for a minute, and think about the moment you ask the question that way. If you come up with something that says, "Oh wow, look at that! I can actually. Wow, I didn't realize that I can. Oh, look at that! I just got an 8% change." You're going to feel really great because you're 80% of where you were. But what if you change the question? And instead of asking, how can I do this by X%, why don't you ask, how could I multiply this by 10? How could I do that? Now, just because you ask the question doesn't mean you're going to get the answer to how can I multiply it by 10. But I can tell you that when you ask that question, when you're curious enough to ask, how can I multiply it by 10, you're not going to get an answer that's 10%. You are going to get an answer like 2 times, 3 times, and that's going to then enable you to build. And you go, my goodness, that was always there. Of course it was always there. Yeah. All you had to do was be a little more curious in the way in which you asked the question. So you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and then giving yourself time to think a little bit before you ask that question, because I know that I was a dreadful manager. When I first came into management, I was awful, absolutely horrific. And it was when it wasn't until I did my first coaching qualification, because I qualified as a rowing coach many years ago, and I learned how to ask better questions, and also understand that not everybody in your team thinks the same way or responds to the same sort of questioning or responds to the same things that you're doing. And that really opened my eyes into the world of coaching and the benefits of coaching, and also coaching from a leadership point of view. So I've done that more and more. And what I've realized is that the more you think before you splurt out the question, you can ask better questions that would get you, responses that are going to make a much, much bigger difference. And I don't know about you, you might have a different book to recommend, but one book in particular that I found the best in terms of asking questions is a guy called Warren Berger, who wrote a book called A More Beautiful Question. And I literally tell everybody to read this book. It's phenomenal. It's not a big book, but it just helps you understand how to ask different questions and how to be a bit more curious to help you do more with your life, really. It's not a self-development book, because it's great. You can apply it to business, you can apply it to life, you can apply it to parenting, managing your parents, things like that. But yeah, do you have any books that you would recommend, Paul?
Oh, I do. I'm reading, or just finished one actually, which is a really interesting book. And it is called The Right It, as in IT, but it doesn't mean IT, right? It's just The Right It. And what it looks at is how seemingly great ideas frequently fail, right? and and it takes you through a series of really interesting processes and questions that it kind of suggests you really ask, which get you focused in a very different way and enable you to find even better answers. So yeah, I love that one. The other one that I like, of course, is one that came out from let's see, I think came out in 2012 actually, and that is Charles Duhigg's book called The Power of Habit. And what that talks about, which is so true, is, and there's a little update to that book as well, by the way, which is, and I'll tell you what that update is called in just a minute. But Charles Duhigg's book is all about how it's never one big hit. It's all about we don't get fit by going to the gym once. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you've got to do these things habitually. And so it is that some of these tiny things that we've been talking about, when we apply them habitually in our business, like for example, think about someone right now who's running or who goes into, this is really interesting, who goes into a retail store. You know that when you go into that retail store, if you're lucky, you will get someone who recognizes that you actually came in, right? That's the lucky part.
Yeah.
And then they're going to say something like, "Can I help you?" And of course, your natural response to that is, "Oh, well, no, thanks. I'm just looking." That's your natural response to that. But what if that's in other words, their habit becomes almost they're asking the question because they know they're going to get a no response, therefore they don't have to do anything. Right? But what if they were to ask a question that was a slightly different question? And what if they were to say, "Oh, welcome to the store. It's so great to see you. By the way, what are you actually looking for today?" Just that simple little change, right? That's all it is. All of a sudden, and then you make that change habitual. It really does bring out some interesting things. By the way, the update on that book is called The Atomic Habit. And I can't remember off the top of my head the author. I've got it here on my phone, so I can find it, but I will find it. But anyway, it's a really cool book, thinking about very micro things about which we have to be curious, and that actually make a major difference. And so, if you're listening to this now, what have you heard us say right throughout the time? Small things, right? Small, tiny things, and keep on, being curious about those things, and actually learn to ask even better questions than the one in which you're doing now. In other words, be more curious, and you're going to find all sorts of interesting answers. Not necessarily to run a quote unquote bigger business, because as we said earlier on, it's not about bigger. It's kind of about better. How could we do it in a better way? And a better way for us, where we do have more freedom by not necessarily working 24 hours a day as most startups do, but really doing it in a smart way, using all of the tools that are there now through technology to remember the story of Joe, to make things so much easier for us and for the customers who we have the privilege to serve.
Well, you talked about technology, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. But I completely agree about The Power of Habit. Fantastic book, and I'm definitely going to check out the other two books as well.
By the way, the author of that book, just quickly, the author of that book, here we go, Atomic Habits, is James Clear, as in clear. So it is a book full of clarity as well. So James Clear.
There we go. And I will include the links to these books in the show notes on my website as well. So you don't need to worry about scrambling and trying to find a piece of paper right now. But
anyway,
but the point about technology is that we talked about like a phone app, and one of the things that I was a bit, well, it's quite simple really, I think, from my point of view, but I was quite blown away by it. But there is a B1G1 phone app. So if you are doing a presentation or you're speaking, you can give to projects through the app, and then as you're giving to those projects, you get like a little cheer. That's right, isn't it, Paul? So it's another really engaging tool.
I could actually.
You can play it through.
I could. I mean, what I'm actually doing on just to show you how simple this is, and I know you can't actually see it, but let's talk about something that I don't understand, and I'm not sure if you understand it either. But that is, I don't understand carbon credits. I don't understand what that is,
Okay.
and I don't understand when I book a flight, it says carbon, and so the result is that we don't do it. But what I do understand is planting trees. I understand that, right? I understand that trees are good, airline flights are not so good. So I have a little thing on my app that says this. When I take a flight, so it says, I plant 24 trees to help restore the environment. That's what I do. So let's imagine I was taking a flight today, which I'm not, but I'll get myself in credit here. And I just put it in right there, and I'm just going to say, add it in, and you'll hear. There you go. You heard, at least I hope you heard, the little cheer. Did it come through?
It's just such an engaging tool, because if you are speaking at an event, if you're, I've used this when I've spoken at an event before, you're kind of demonstrating the power of giving, but also engaging with the audience at the same time. And I think that engagement tool is so, so important. And one thing that I wanted to, or two things that I wanted to touch upon was, how B1G1 have made these kind of like tools and widgets available to help businesses engage better with their team and also with their clients by using these interactive widgets that you can embed on your website. Now, how long did it take you to kind of come up with this idea, develop this, and make it accessible to everybody?
Oh, well, again, the idea is actually quite simple. And these days, you can do that in, rapid time. So I think if we go back to the initial development of that, we scheduled it to be a 6-week period. And it actually became an 8-week period. And that was mostly because of Apple, by the way. So yeah, it can happen very, very quickly these days. And by the way, that's another interesting point. I think one of the things that we do learn is that perfect is not the best way necessarily. Because people do want to stop and make things perfect. What I actually think is we need to get things out there, so that, or as Seth Godin would say, ship. Right, and just get it out there so that people can actually experience it, and then as a result of that, you can build those experiences, because you into the things that you do, and really connect with customers in really interesting ways. And one of the things we do in B1G1, we actually make members part of the whole development process, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, and again, that's another thing, right? That one of the things that I think we need to do is to recognize that, and we've used this word a couple of times. It's a C word, just like curiosity, and so the word is this. It really is all about connection. If there's one thing that this is about, that everything we do, it's not about marketing, it's not about selling, it's not about promoting, it's not about all of those things. What it's actually about is connecting. And so if we can look at everything from the lens of when we're writing a blog, for example, when we're doing whatever it is we're doing, and instead of asking like, oh, well, how am I going to sort of turn this into a sales message? How am I going to convince people to do this or persuade people to do that? All we need to do is think about it from, how am I going to connect, right? And the moment we do that, and by the way, the reason that B1G1 works so well, just to get back to that, is because a lot of people think, just from the example that we just had, that's about, connecting with customers and connecting with team members, which of course it is. But it's also about connecting with ourselves. And, the story, a very quick story, Charlie, I don't think you've heard, but I think most of the people joining us now would have heard this phrase, out of the mouths of babes, right, comes wisdom. And so I remember once where we had been on a B1G1 study tour. And it turns out that one of the people, his name is Jeremy, he brought his daughter, whose name is Jessica. And Jessica at the time was 14. And so Jessica's with us, and she has this amazing experience on the study tour. And then through a particular set of circumstances, I got asked if I could go to Jessica's school to talk with her class. Well, by the time I got there, it wasn't the class. The principal of the school decided it should be the entire school. So there's 540 kids, right, in this thing. And Jessica, who's very quiet person, and she was going to do the introduction. And so I said to Jess, is there one thing that you would like me to leave behind in the speech? If there's one thing you wanted me to share, what would it be? And she said, "Oh, I'm very clear on that." And I said, "Okay, so what is it?" And she said, "Well," and it relates to giving, right? She said, "Well, when we give, we often think that the beneficiary is the person who receives the giving, right? That's who we think the beneficiary is." But she said, "But what I now understand is actually we're the beneficiary of doing it." I mean, isn't that just out of the mouths of the babes, right? And again, the moment you realize that, you will not get into this Sunday aisle. You go, you know what? That actually makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll start doing that as well, right? And then when you do, you'll just and you'll do it not because you're going to reap rewards or anything like that, but just because it's better for you. And there's so much stuff now, as you know, Charlie, that is there that says, what's one of the secrets of growth businesses? Answer: they have giving right at the core. What's one of the things of happy people? Answer: they have thinking about others and giving right at their core.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a very central thing to us living better lives, and at the same time helping others live them as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I set up my business, because I wanted to create a bigger impact in the world. And my kind of ethos is around a very much a giving culture. It's not necessarily in terms of like giving impacts, like giving money away all the time. But, I've always found that if you give, whether it's you're giving advice, you're giving help or support to somebody, it doesn't always have to be in monetary terms. But if you have a giving first approach, then you actually receive so much more and you live a much more fulfilled life. And exactly what you said before about connections is that the businesses that I've been fortunate to work at in the past, and also what I do now, is all around, connecting your team together, connecting your business with your clients, connecting your messaging with your market, or rather your market with your messaging. And it is all around creating those connections, because when you can get that right, that's really where things start to take off and you get more referral business, you get more people talking about you. And especially for startups with really small marketing budgets or sort of businesses that have got large R&D costs and they're putting all the money into that, is that you really do rely on that word of mouth marketing, and you do rely on a lot of people talking about you in a favorable way. The more connections you can create, the better that you will do. For sure.
Exactly right.
And it's so easy to get started as well. I think that is the one thing, because I was chatting to a couple of people yesterday, because I went to a conference. It's a geospatial conference down in London. I've been going to it for many years now, which is all around surveying and measurement. So people that take a lot of surveys and measure things with laser scanners and all sorts of other things.
That's one of the things I used to do at Hewlett Packard, funnily enough, way back when. Yeah, I know those things, right?
Yeah, you started talking about mining, and I was like, oh yeah, I spent 6 years working in the mining industry, so very familiar with that world. But it's that kind of, as a mentality, especially a lot of people think of marketing as, I need large marketing budgets in order to, get my message out there. I need large budgets, or I can't afford to spend what I want to spend on marketing. I can't afford to spend on a mentor or a coach or a coaching community. I can't afford to give back to charity, or I can't afford to make a contribution in this world because I'm not quite there yet. And what I love about the B1G1 is just so accessible to anybody. I mean, I'm still very, very new into business. I'm not turning over millions, so I can't all that kind of hit that success, whatever that means. But you can still get started, and you can give a child access to clean water for as little as $0.01. Which for me that really blew my mind. When I first came into the community, I was just like, just for $0.01, really, right? Anybody can afford that.
Yeah. Yep, and indeed, and but you can be a part of the movement and connect in. I think if I were to put it in When we're talking in the US, we say it's $1 a day, but I think in the UK we would say it's something like 77 cents a day or something. So consider that in relation to, oh, let me get a cup of coffee. Well, that's probably a little more than 77 cents.
It is. It's when you put it
And
into perspective like that, don't you? You start comparing it to the other things that you spend. I do that a lot with people because they're like, oh, I can't afford something. Because I think when you think about pricing, you think that somebody's taking something away from you. So they're taking your money away from you rather than thinking, okay, well, what am I investing in? What am I going to get back from that investment? And it's just like, yeah, you spend so much money on coffee every day, but you could instead funnel that investment into a membership and be able to give people in
one
need.
Of the things, you're quite right. One of the things we tend to not do is ask the question of, well, what if I did? What if I did?
Yeah.
What that could come in? What if I did? What have I got to lose by doing this? And the answer is, or by doing, whatever it is. And the answer is nothing. There's so much stuff. And in B1G1, as you know, we say to people, by the way, if you don't like it, guess what? We give you your money back. So there's no risk to doing any of this, right?
Yeah.
So I would hope that because you're a fabulous ambassador for what's going on here, and the people listening to us now, they can't do what I can do, which is see your smile, and I can see your eyes lighting up when you talk about these things, and just imagine going through the day like that, right, as a result of doing something that you were saying about taking action on some things right now. Right? Yeah, you're right on point. We could spend all day talking about it, couldn't we?
I was just thinking that, just looking at the time, I was like, we could be talking for hours and hours and hours. So just to kind of wrap up, really, I will include all of the show notes on my website. Also, if you want to know how I incorporate giving into my business, then if you go to charlieweinman.com, instead of /podcast, just go /business for good. You can see some information about the sustainable development goals and what it is that I'm doing from a micro business point of view. But then also if you go to the B1G1 website, then you've got a whole plethora of information and case studies and examples and lots of other stuff to get stuck into.
And actually, one of the things that one of the team members here, and we run a very lean team, and they were hearing what was going on because they're hearing my side of all of this, and they sent me a little note on Slack, and the little note said, "Oh, Paul, you might want to pass this on to people, right?" So I'm serious. I'm not making this up. This is the first time I've been to. I'm serious. This is the first time I've been to this page. So if you want to take a note of this page, it's this b1g1.com /Paul, Paul, and then a hyphen, as in a hyphen above the line hyphen, and then gift, as in GIFT. Now, I'm clicking it right now. I did it about 10 minutes ago, just to, and I'd never seen it before. And it's really cool. And what it says is that when you go there, we're going to give you this new little thing, seriously quite new, Charlie, which is a brilliant little book, which you can download. And it's called 19 Extraordinary Power of Small Ideas to Transform Your Business. And so when you go there and you want to be part of all of this, then you will be able to get that. So remember, Paul, or b1g1.com /Paul-gift, GIFT. And seriously, Charlie, I've not even seen that page before. So that was literally on the fly for you right there.
Well, I will put a link to that on my website and highly recommend that you go to the B1G1 website, access your gift, go and read that book, because honestly, you will absolutely love it. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you or find out more, what is the best way of doing it? Although I do have to say that literally, if you're in London or Europe, and if you're in Europe, it's well worth the trip. It's a 2-day event in October. I'll include the link on the website, but Paul and Masami are going to be there. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're not supposed to sort of say that we are, but yes, we are.
So there you go. You heard it here first. Paul and Masami are going to be there as well. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic event organised by the wonderful Steve Pipe. I will include all of the information on my website. It's very, very worth booking on to go because it will be brilliant.
It's astonishing. It's an astonishing thing.
Yeah, so like how can people keep in touch with you, and what's the best way other than everything that we've talked about?
Drop up there on that link that we mentioned a little while back there, the b1g1.com/Paul-gift. Or if people want to drop me an email, which of course would be very nice, it's just simply paul@b1g1.com. But of course, the best way to connect is connect with Charlie, right? We talk about connection. And of course, Charlie is so, one of the most connected people that you could ever meet, and is doing great things. Before we opened up this, she was telling me that she'd been here in Singapore and doing all sorts of wonderful things. So connect with Charlie or connect with me. There you go. You've got a nice choice. And talking about connecting, I just want to say, Charlie, we had some times in the past couple of weeks, which for reasons that we don't want to go into, we had to kind of miss. And I've been looking forward so much to having this conversation with you. And how thrilling is it that I can have the conversation with you, but all of the people that are there listening to the podcast can actually be a part of it. So I just want to give a shout out to you for making it possible, and importantly for the people who are listening. Hopefully what's happened is we've given you some ideas and some insights that make a difference to your world, so that you can then use those to make a difference to others' worlds as well.
I love it. And thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, because it's the evening time for you now, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Beer o'clock.
I think we're 7 hours ahead of you right here. 7 hours. That's right. We are. Yeah. It's 13 hours by plane, but 7 hours by time, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So it's beer o'clock for you, and it's just getting sort of the start of the day for me.
Coffee o'clock for you. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Charlie, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on here. I can't wait to share this interview with everybody else as well. Thank you.
It's an absolute privilege. Thanks, Charlie. Bye.
Bye.